Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is a show all about implanting hope in our hearts. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by my friend Amanda DeSantis. We're glad you're here for our uplifting conversation about faith and how it sustains our hearts through all the seasons of life. Thanks for walking with us.
Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is Amanda DeSantis here on Patchwork Heart Ministry YouTube channel. It's great to be here with all of you. And the founder of Patchwork Heart is not able to be with us today on this podcast. Bill Snyder will make a warm hello to Bill. Thank you so much for all that he does for Patchwork Heart Ministry and also for our podcast. And we have an amazing guest for you today. We have Amanda Lauer. She is a Catholic author and speaker and wife, mother. Amanda, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, it's exciting because I was looking at your beautiful website, and her website is amandalauer.com. It's spelled L-A-U-E-R, and she does historical fiction for all ages. And we have so much to talk about the great things that you're doing. But before we get into what's happening like in the present moment, tell us a little bit about you and your family.
Sure. So my husband, John, and I have been married for 42 years. We just had our anniversary on September 11th. We have 4 grown children, 3 daughters and a son. Our youngest daughter is getting married October 14th, so that's just a few weeks off. And our middle daughter, Samantha, is due to have her second baby October 5th, so October is going to be a big month. It's also my dad's 85th birthday, so add that into the mix. And yeah, it's a wonderful, loving family, and we have our children and their spouses, and then this will be grandchild number 8 when he arrives. So yeah, it's a great family.
Awesome. And I believe you are in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Correct. And here I'm in the Philadelphia area. Bill Snyder is also from in the Wisconsin area, lives in Wisconsin. So great to be here with you on this podcast. And looking at your website, you have a lot of new things going on with your writing. You have the Heaven Intended series and Anything But Groovy, which we definitely want to talk about. But before we get into that, is there any kind of backstory that you'd like to give us in terms of how you got involved in writing and maybe some of your initial books? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, for sure. So my first job out of school was proofreading. So I proofread for a large insurance company. I did that for 4 years until my husband and I started our family. Then I took like a 15-year break. After our youngest was in 2nd grade, Elizabeth, the one who was getting married, then I went back to work part-time as a proofreader for a large newspaper in our state. They had several regional papers, so I proofread 7 regional papers. After proofreading thousands of articles, I figured out how to write articles. And when they were short beat reporters, I volunteered to go cover boys high school football. So I may have been the only one doing that, the only woman doing that in the late 1990s. But after I started learning how to write sports, then other editors would come forward asking me to help in their particular areas, whether it was health or new houses or you name it, I was writing about it. And after 9/11, our papers were all shut down. And so we were all on our own. And I decided to go into freelancing. So I became a freelance writer, and I was writing for about 24 different papers. And our youngest daughter, again, Elizabeth, had some serious health issues and was a Make-A-Wish child. And so I had to cut it back to 2. So I was writing. So for 19 years, I've been writing for the Green Bay Diocesan newspaper, The Compass, and then also a business newspaper that also happened to be Catholic owned as well. And when I was writing for the business newspaper, I was shooting photos one day and talking to the gentleman, and he was saying, do you write books at all? I said, no, but I have a dream. I'd love to write a book. And he said, well, my wife is writing a book and she has an agent in New York City. I'm like, really? And like, I'd love to meet her. So we, in essence, decided to meet like after the holidays that year. I think it was around 2009. And she said, just bring a chapter of your new book and I'll bring a chapter of my book and we'll just trade and copy edit, proofread over coffee. So we did that for 2 years. And after 2 years, we each had a book. And she went and got hers published, and I started the query process. That took about 2 years because I had very little time with our daughter's health issues. But I finally struck gold with Full Quiver Publishing in Ontario, and they publish Catholic fiction, which is a kind of a difficult thing to get published, basically. And so, my first book that I wrote was called A World Such as Heaven Intended, and it was a Civil War book, and it was based on a true story. A friend here in Wisconsin, his great 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 uncle had fought in the Civil War and had a really intriguing story, one I had never heard, and I love Civil War history. And I always thought someone should write that guy's book, and it turned out to be me. So I wrote one book. It came out in October 2014, and I said, my life is complete. I'm going back to my journalism career. And a week later, someone was asking for the sequel. I said, it took like 6 years to get this first book out. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The funny story was, she said, well, my grandma wants to know what happens to Dominic. I said, first of all, how old is your grandma? And second, I don't even know what happened to Dominic. I don't have all his letters that he sent home. Well, it turned out grandma was 93, and before her grandmother passed away, we did have another book in the series out. So that was the start of the Heaven Intended series. So we have a world such as heaven intended, a life such as heaven intended, a love such as heaven intended, a freedom such as heaven intended. And then the fifth book in that series actually comes out on November 17th this year, and it's called A Faith Such as Heaven Intended. And book number 6, I was literally typing on that this morning before we spoke.
Wow.
So that's that. Yeah. So that's the Heaven Intended Civil War series. But I do also I had a great interest in time travel when I was a child. I went to a little tiny school, St. John's in northern Wisconsin. And the library was so small that our principal was also our librarian. So it was Sister Frances Ann. And we grew to be fond friends, and we're still friends. And she saw me in the library all the time. And one book I checked out continuously was A Wrinkle in Time. I just love that kind
A Wrinkle in Time. Mm-hmm.
right? That and probably Little House on the Prairie and every Nancy Drew book, of course, tells you my age. I'm a little older than you. But yeah, I love the book, and I always was fascinated with the concept. So I had started a book years ago. It was kind of chronicling my years at St. John's. But 7th grade year was hard for me because I was bullied for some reason. And I had written this story about my 7th grade and what went on and how things were resolved in a peaceful fashion. And a friend from the Catholic Writers Guild said, that's kind of a cool coming of age story. It's popular with adults, but do you want to sell this to teens too? I said, well, yeah. She said, you need to make it into a time travel, because that way modern day teens, you take a modern day teenager. In this story, she gets hit in the head playing volleyball, and she wakes up and she's in her mom's body in 1974 and has to live her mom's whole 7th grade year with all the bullying, trying to figure out the friendships. You don't have things like helicopter parents. Your parents didn't drive you anywhere. Our moms didn't even drive back in the day. And so it's just the fish out of water tale. There's a lot of humor. There's some serious notes. Religion brought into this. Obviously, she's going to a Catholic school. And that's at the point when the Catholic Church was changing quite a bit. So we were having like the Alleluia guitar masses, which was all new. And how she gets through this kind of horrendous year of her mom's. I mean, there was a lot of fun times, a lot of laughters, but a lot of stress from this guy picking on her. And how her mom's old best friend actually came to her rescue and somewhat saved her life. So that's called Anything But Groovy. And so I finally got to combine my story and make it into a time travel, which was so much fun to write. And I feel like a lot of people have said to me, a lot of moms or grandmas have said, I've read it with my daughter or my granddaughter, because I realized I've never talked to my kids like what my middle school years were like, and it brings up lots of great conversations. So it's been very gratifying that I get a lot of notes from people saying how much they enjoy that. So I love that genre, and I wanted to write another book in that, and that's the book that's coming up on October 2nd, Royal and Ancient.
Royal and Ancient. Tell us.
Okay. Well, the interesting thing about Royal and Ancient is, I've always had an affinity for things that were Scottish. I love the kilts on the guys. I love bagpipe music. I love the Highlands. I love Highlanders. Always had a fascination with that. And so I had written a short story with Catholic Teen Books, a time travel about this 17-year-old girl working on a golf course in the United States, gets struck by lightning. She wakes up in the Highlands. It's the year 1691. She's surrounded by Highlanders, including a good-looking Highlander, a couple of years older than her. And that was the short story I had written for the, let's see, that book was Ashes, Visible and Invisible. And so I knew that I wanted to create a longer story out of it. And so I did that about 2 years ago. I started, and it's such a fascinating book because I took an actual event from history, the Glencoe Massacre, and I built this book around this massacre. So basically what was happening is Catholicism was outlawed in Scotland in the late 1600s. And some families and some clans were still practicing the faith, but if they got caught, it could lead to, imprisonment, sometimes death. And the bottom line was the MacDonald clan was practicing the faith. They had a priest on their property who was hidden and still doing mass and doing the sacraments. And someone turned them into the British government, and their clan was, the leaders of the clan, many of them were massacred, and this was in February of 1692. So this poor girl falls into, not only is she traveling back in time 300 years, but all these things are occurring around her. And in the meantime, she's fallen hard for this young man whose father was the leader of the MacDonald clan. And things get very complicated because they don't know that she's traveling through time. She certainly does. So she's trying to keep that hidden. Someone finds out. She gets accused of being one of the people who tipped off the British government. So there's a lot of complications, but a lot of fun in it too, because, again, being the fish out of water, she's 300 years back in time and trying to, do all the things that women could do back in the days, which is a lot different than nowadays. Nowadays girls are great at texting and all sorts of good stuff, computers, math, all that. But back in the day, it was more the hands-on skills that she had to learn how to do all these things. She was learning how to run a Scottish household, even though she didn't know if she would be there very long or how long, but she had to do something while she was there. The thing I wanted to mention about the Scottish part in general, how I like Scottish everything. My father, his family's Irish. My grandparents were born in Ireland, and my father's first generation American. And I never knew what the other half of me was because my mom had never met her birth father. And through Ancestry.com, we got the answer while I was working on this book that her father is Scottish and British. And it just felt like it was just perfect timing for this book to come to life because I had started this book at least 9 or 10 years ago. And I kept putting it on the back burner for some reason. And I think everything's in God's timing. And another thing too with this book is I'm working with a bigger press now. I pitched this book to Chrism Press last year at the Catholic Marketing Network and the Catholic Writers Guild conference. And they bid on it right away and loved it. And this is actually the first YA or young adult title they've ever published. So they're taking a chance on me because this is a new genre for them. But it's been just wonderful working with them. It's a bigger publishing house than Full Quiver, so there's a lot more layers you have to go through to get the book published, a lot more copy editing and line editing and everything under the sun. But after many revisions, the book is done. It's at the printer right now. Hopefully I'll get my copies next week. And yeah, everybody in the world will get to see this on October 2nd.
Wow, how exciting. So much going on. And interesting how since the year of about 2009, I think you said, when life just changed dramatically for you with all of the writing opportunities. And that's just a wonderful thing. Now, I noticed on your website that you also have a space for events. I didn't know if there was anything that you wanted to share, or are you doing speaking engagements? Anything that you want to share with our audience on that?
I do speaking engagements, and I'm always open to speaking engagements. I'll go anywhere. I'm waiting for the people from Scotland to call me up and ask me to come over and pay for my flight or something. But yeah, recently I spoke at the Jesuit Retreat House. That was last Wednesday. I spoke at a writers conference just Sunday night this week that was in Green Lake, Wisconsin, that I was attending. I have an event coming up at a church in Appleton, Wisconsin called St. Thomas More. That's at the end of October. I believe it's October 27th. And every year I am part of a group of Catholic Writers Guild writers who sign books at the Columbus Catholic Women's Conference in Columbus, Ohio. That's, I believe, this year around February 16th or 18th, coming up in 2024. And potentially I'll be again next October at the Michigan Catholic Women's Conference. So I love speaking about writing. I love speaking about being a Catholic writer. I love speaking to women and to mixed groups. And I love speaking to kids as well. I go to Catholic schools and Catholic middle schools because my books are geared towards that age. And I've had some wonderful, wonderful presentations with these kids. I just love working with kids that age anyhow. And I love writing towards kids who are in like late middle school and high school and above. I just love their insight, and they're so open and honest about everything. They really tell you what they're thinking about the writing or the question. They'll ask questions that are like really insightful. And I get some of the nicest letters from these kids, even boys. It's kind of funny. Like one of my biggest fans was like an 8th grade boy who just loved the Civil War series. And I can see why, because the series is written in first person limited perspective. So every other chapter is in the young lady's head, and then the opposite chapter is in the young man's head. So you're seeing the Civil War from the home front, and you're seeing it from the battlefront.
Wow. How creative of you. Were you always very creative? Obviously, this is a pretty big endeavor, all that you've been doing with the writing, all of the writing that you're doing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I ever considered myself to be creative per se, because when I went to school, I didn't finish my degree in this, but I was studying chemical engineering. So I think I was more wired that way. But I've always been an excellent proofreader, and I've always loved reading. And the proofreading, after proofreading as many articles as I had, I learned the science of writing. And even now, writing my books, the first book I wrote, I literally had to go on my bookshelf and look at a fiction work and go, how did they do the he said, she said? I really didn't know what I was doing, but I've had some amazing patient editors who have helped me through this process, and I've learned so much. And I'm one of these people that I really try to absorb what people are teaching me so I don't make the same mistakes twice. So I think every manuscript is getting better. Hopefully my editors agree there. I think so. And yeah.
Wow, such great things. Is there anything else that you would want to share? Maybe somebody's watching right now and they're interested in writing. It could even just be articles or something. Would you have any words of wisdom for them to get started? How does somebody get started in, doesn't have to be exactly what you do, but just doing writing that isn't just viewed by themselves, right?
Yeah. Well, how I got started in writing is, like I said, I was proofreader and I volunteered. And I would have volunteered to do this for free because I wanted to learn how to do it. And I will say I have written a lot of articles for free, and I still write articles for free. Like I'm one of the contributors for CatholicMom.com. So yeah, those, we don't get paid for that, which I'm more than happy to do. I love the community. But as far as a lot of people do the traditional route, they go to school for English or for something like that. I didn't do the traditional route. I learned the ropes. I learned as I went along. One thing when I went into freelancing, I said, I don't want to write those gritty, stories about crimes or anything like that. So I just made up my mind. I'm going to write about nice things, like about beautiful houses or weddings or interesting people, human interest stories. And when I went into freelancing, I said, this is my niche. This is where I fit well. This is what I want to cover. And I've been lucky to have a lot of wonderful editors through the years who saw that I had talent in doing that and agreed to it. And so, yeah, as far as getting in, yeah, like I said, there's traditional way. People go to school. Usually you start at the bottom somewhere. I just kind of skipped all that, went right in. And even finding my publisher, I was talking to a gal who's an agent the other day, and she's just like astounded by my story. Like, no one does it the way you did it. So I might not be the best role model because I made my own path in this world. But one thing I do, I challenge myself all the time too. I constantly look for difficult things and I do them. And if someone asks me to do something, even if I've never done it before, I say yes first and then figure it out later. And it seemed to
Good
have worked.
advice. Yeah,
I've
no,
created a career out of this.
that's right. Some of your words of wisdom might help somebody who's watching today and thinking, wow, maybe they're not exactly like you, but they would like to take writing up. Would you want to tell us about some of your favorite characters in your latest books?
So this would be Royal and Ancient, which would be Bronwyn and Ian. And I love Bronwyn. She's just spunky, typical teenage girl. She's was raised in the Catholic faith, but did it by rote, did what she had to do. She was being raised in a family with just her dad, no brothers or sisters. Her mom wasn't in the picture. And she really didn't appreciate her faith all that much until she got to Scotland and saw how much these people were willing to give up to practice the Catholic faith. And so there's so much growth in this young lady. And a lot of the characters, I think a lot of writers would do this, they base characters kind of on themselves. And I feel like this could have been me at 17 had I been thrown back in time. I hope I would be as good as she was. But you learn, you adjust, you try to have the best attitude you can, because I think she had learned lessons from her father that every situation, no matter what's thrown at you, it's your choice how you're going to handle it. You can cry, you can complain, or take personal responsibility. That's actually a quote from my husband that he told our kids a lot. But every situation you're faced with, it's your attitude that determines everything. So even though she didn't necessarily want to be thrown back in time, she didn't want to have to deal with all the stuff that was going on. She just said, I'm going to do everything I can, because if God didn't want me to be here, I wouldn't be here. So God put me here. If he put me here, he'll get me through it. So I love her attitude. And then of course Ian too. He's just such a wonderful young man. He was studying in the monastery. Of course, all the monasteries are closed at that time. He was in another country studying, and I don't want to give all the details away of the book, but he had to come back to Scotland. And so he's thrown into a position where he is being trained to be the leader of the clan, even though he thought he was going to be having the life of a priest or a monk or something like that. And he also realizes you have to deal with the situations that are handed to you in life. And God presented that to him, and he was going to make the best of it. And he was determined to be the best leader that he could be. And so it's very interesting watching his growth. And he knows a lot about the Catholic faith because he had been in the monastery. So he helped Bronwyn with her spiritual growth. So it really is a beautiful thing. And Bronwyn teaches him a lot too, because she comes from modern America. Not that she knows, engineering or medical or anything like that, but she just teaches him more things, maybe some of the soft skills, communication, things like that, and how women are treated differently now than they were back then. And he learns to bend and to become a better person too. So I love that growth in them.
Wow, it's great to hear, because you can see, I think when I said the comment or the question about the creativity, and when you're describing these characters, I'm thinking about how you formulated them and how obviously it's partly your own experience, but also just a little research and the Holy Spirit too, right? I mean, all these things come together. They all come together. Tell us also a little bit about anything that you might want to share before we close to the end of the podcast fairly soon, about your faith journey, because obviously these books are something that, your faith has a lot to do with.
Yeah.
And your faith has grown, I'm sure, in the process of all of this.
Absolutely. I have done so much studying of the Catholic Church from hundreds of years ago. It's amazing. Such a beautiful church. I'm just so happy to be part of it. I'm so glad I was raised in this faith. I will thank my dad for that. He's amazing. But yeah, as you read this stuff, you realize all the martyrs for our faith. I mean, there's a reason that people give up their life. They have so much faith, and that's been so inspiring. And so I've been trying to grow in my own faith and add more and more things to my life, like I do the rosary daily. I talk about that a lot in my books, The Rosary. I try to get to Mass 3 days a week. Just different things I'm implementing. But what you had mentioned the Holy Spirit before, and I just have to say that well, let's put it this way. The Blessed Mother, I have a statue of her on my desk. She's my agent. So I pray to her daily, particularly before I start writing. But every night when I'm going to sleep and I'm working on a manuscript, I literally pray to the Holy Spirit and to my guardian angel to give me the ideas, to put the ideas in my head for the chapter I'll be writing the next day. I can only think one chapter ahead. I'm not one of these people who plots out an entire book. I know how it begins, I know how it ends, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in the middle that I don't know when I start. And so I use the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And it's crazy how effective that's been for me. Generally, I wake up in the morning, I either have an idea formulating in my head, or when I'm in the shower. That seems like where all the ideas come flooding in as you're sitting there. That's usually where I'll be like, the eureka moment, like, yeah, I should do that or that. And the other thing is the research too. A lot of times just doing all the research brings me, well, it brings me sometimes in rabbit holes, but it just enriches the story, because I find out all these little tidbits about life hundreds of years ago or whatever. And if I have a 250-page story, I generally have about 125 pages of notes taken from basically websites that talk about these various things. But kind of to wrap it up with my faith, I love writing Catholic books. And people say, well, what brought you into this genre? I said, I wasn't looking to be a Catholic writer per se. I am a Catholic writer who writes books, but I realized I wanted to write the kind of books that I wanted to read. I love sweet historic romances, and I couldn't find them anywhere. I didn't know if anybody's writing them, so I decided it was going to be me, because I couldn't find them. And I wanted to write books that my children and my grandchildren would read someday, that I would be proud that they were reading. And coincidentally, our oldest grandson he turned 10 in January, and this summer he read Anything But Groovy and loved it. And it was just so heartwarming hearing him talk about the book, because I'm like, oh my gosh, my dreams have finally come true. I wanted all my kids read all my books. They're such a blessing. I love them so much. They're very supportive. But now it's super cool that now my grandchildren are getting old enough to read them. And I'm looking forward to the next group, because they kind of come in waves of ages from 8 down to 2, and then a newborn coming. So it'll be really neat when they all start to get to that age too and can read them.
Awesome. Awesome. It's wonderful to have you on this podcast. I want to remind people that they can go to amandalauer.com, Lauer. Please buy her books on Amazon or where books are sold. Do you have any final words before we end?
Well, I just, for one thing, want to thank you for taking the time to interview me. It's been great. And it's so gratifying talking to people about my books. And I have a goal to sell, I hate to sound, it doesn't sound salesy, but like to sell millions of books. But it's not because I want to sell millions of books. I want millions of people to be exposed to these beautiful stories, and maybe it will deepen their faith, or maybe they're not Catholic and they get an interest in the Catholic faith. So if I can have some hand in that, then really I feel like I'm successful. And so I'm just so grateful for the gifts God has given me, and I want to do everything I do for His greater glory. And so I'm going to continue writing as long as that's the path He wants me on.
God bless you. Thank you so much for all you do, and a warm hello to your family and friends. And to all of you who are watching this podcast, keep beating to those Catholic hearts. We'll see you next time here on the Sowing Hope podcast with Bill Snyder and myself, Amanda DeSantis. See you then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Radio. For more information about this podcast and our ministries, visit our websites, patchworkheart.org and andesantis.com. You can also follow and interact with us on Twitter at PWH Ministry or Ann DeSantis 2.